Okay, welcome back to this parallel session sorry, I got lost here. On structural change for inclusive and sustainable industrial development. So we have three presenters today, Giuliano, Toshiro, Yajima on my left, and then Etienne Espagne, who's just in front of me, and finally Guilherme Magacho. Before we start the session, I just want to recall for all the people present in the room that we have mics in the room for everyone. So if you can please refrain from turning pages and typing strongly or loudly on your laptop, because this will be picked up in by the mics. So you have to be like extremely quiet today and listen deliciously to the presenters, which will increase your concentration. So yes. We will have 20 minutes presentation for everyone, and then finally half an hour of discussion. If we cut it shorter, then it might happen. We'll see how it goes. Anyway, so thank you very much for being here. So as I said, three distinguished speakers today. We will first start with Giuliano Yajima, who's a Ph.D. student in Sapienza University in Rome. And he will talk about the economic of environmental effect of a green employment of last resort, a sectoral multiplier analysis for the US. We start sharing the screen. And now you should have, this.
Okay, so thank you everybody. Thank you for the people who are present here and both who are attending online. And as Antoine said, I'm Giuliano Yajima, a PhD from the University of Rome Sapienza, and I'm presenting this work today, co-authored with my colleague Nikolaos Foudoutsakis, and from Kipe and from Greece, and there is also we do have another co-author, which from the Panteion University, George Sorkis. So as I said, this is a sectoral analysis for the US, in which we try to estimate the impact of the adoption of a green employment of last resort program. So if you can, someone, okay, I can. Okay, nice. Okay, so well, obviously the recent health and economic crisis has revived and make up the case for policy that target employment directly instead of trying to achieve it via a general demand push. And one of the proposals that have been, reassessed in the aftermath of COVID, not just the COVID crisis, but also the current crisis, is the case for a job guarantee or employment of some scheme of employment of last resort policy, which actually has a long story, and I don't have time to go into the how this concept was born. But what I want to stress here, that this policy has been increasingly intertwining with the Green New Deal policy package, which is a policy proposal to increase energy efficiency and promote both environmental and social sustainability, which was firstly proposed by some researchers, a number of researchers at the Lee Economic Institute. So in few words, what is this green employment or last resort policy? It's basically has two aims. The first one is to tackle employment and achieve full employment by targeting labor force with mostly below average skills and tackling also labor intensive vacancies, such as vacancies which are in the sector, in the career service, in the career service sector, or in the small constructions. And this will add a boost to the and also an output effect on aggregate demand. So, and they estimated, actually the lead researcher estimated that for an annual impact on the federal government budget of probably $400 billion US for for a time span of approximately 10 years, there will be a boost to GDP of around 560 billion, and an employment effect of 90 million new workers, which is made out of 15 direct job guarantee effect of 50 million job guarantee effect, plus for indirect an addition of 4 million workers created by the boost in aggregate demand. Actually, this particular proposal has been as I told you, this proposal has a long story, but trying to get this long story short has been criticized on several, on several points. In particular, we are here at the French Development Agency, that this applicability for small open economies, and actually one can also find another true criticism, that is the fact that either this is the policy proposal may have too much of an impact from the ecological side, and perhaps too less smaller impact on the output and employment dimension. And at the same time, one can also argue that if we focus too much on the let's say ecological sustainability, the effect on output and employment may fail out to show up. So, in order to let's say, in order to reassess part of the work that has been done at the Levy, we try to re-estimate the effect of this policy proposal by using a different framework with respect to the one that was used. It was grounded on the standard closed economy Leontief multipliers, by trying to estimate the effect on the US economy using a different quantitative methodological tools, that is the tools provided by the multipliers effect estimated. The multipliers estimated in a Sraffian or Neribardian framework. And beside the theoretical, we also add an extension of this framework by estimating directly the effect, the total import demand multipliers and the ecological multipliers. To be short on this, on the say technique, on the methodological innovation that we produce, as I said, the Leontief multipliers simply shows up the technical condition of production, whereas the Sraffian or Hus multipliers actually includes all the other 5 points that you see there. That is based on top of the technical condition of production, the income distributions, and so the social condition, and the saving ratios out of wages and profits, the consumption pattern, and since we also estimated directly the import multipliers, also imports per unit of gross output. And how it is translated, for instance, for the case of the carbon emission multipliers? Well, it simply adds up to the standard, let's say, vector of carbon emission intensities, and it's simply multiplied by this pi, which is the multipliers. Actually, the multiplier contains both the standard multipliers and all the other four dimensions that I mentioned you. So that will be the result for our estimation. To be very brief for this, and to focus particularly on the energy multipliers, of course you can see that the huge the huge contributors of CO2 is the energy sector. On top, and then of course there is also the contribution by trade and the transportation sectors, who will be those the T51, which are both public and private transportations. And perhaps this table will show you better than if we also take into account all that I've said. It emerged clearly that the service sector, and in particular the public service sectors, are the one with the more desirable properties. That is, the one who have a bigger impact in terms of output and employment creation, and they are more efficient in terms of import and CO2 generations. We also estimated the let's say the ratio between those multipliers. We can be assumed as a proxy of elasticity. So to have a more, let's say, structural indicators of those of this macro sector. And again, they show you they show the same picture, in particular with respect to the tertiary sector. And Having this in mind, we identify five actually. It said actually six, but we implicitly assume that the scenario one was the baseline scenario provided by our colleague at the Lady Institute, again with a different methodological tool and also with different data. So in our first scenario, I mean our own original scenario, we distributed evenly to all the 44 sectors of our economy this 400 billion stimulus. And then in scenario 3, we picked up the sector that were more, were what we call the green demand management sector. That is the sector who were performing better in terms of output and employee multipliers, and were more efficient in terms of and had less a smaller coefficient in terms of CO2 and import demand. Scenario 5 actually. Scenario 4 actually picked up a different the indicator that I mentioned you before. That is those proxy for the elasticity. That is the ratio between these the different multipliers. And again, with the aim of picking up the best sector as I previously defined. And scenario 5 actually is a combination of the two previous scenarios. Scenario 6 is a scenario in which instead we distributed these additional stimulus to aggregate demand in accordance with the current composition of government expenditure in 2018, which was the years that we take for in which we use for compute our simulation. And what we found out actually, and how much time do you still have? 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Okay. What we found out actually is that we don't have a clear winner or a clear champions in terms of this scenario. That is, we either have a scenario in which is generally more efficient in terms of CO2 generation and imports generation, which will be the scenario 4, which was again the one that we picked up based on this those ratio and those elasticities. And instead, but it's not performing that good in relative terms with respect to other scenarios. For instance, the scenario that performs better. The best in terms of employment creation is scenario 3, which was the scenario in which we picked up the sector based on their composition, based on the sector who had the best output and employment multipliers and the worst CO2 and import multipliers. Interestingly, the one who performed the best in terms of output creation, so growth, it was the scenario 6, which was, the scenario with which we assume the same composition of government expenditure for 2000. The current composition of which is going to unchange the current composition of government expenditure. One can say that it can be a kind of business as usual scenario for the government. And actually, it does surprisingly good. Okay, so I didn't include in this version well, never mind. So it does surprisingly good in terms of output creation and to a certain extent also employment creation, but he also managed to minimize the impact on import generation. But actually, one is the second worst in terms of CO2 emissions. And then what is also surprising to a certain extent is that scenario 5, which was again the one who combined both, let's say, the short run and the long run properties captured by this captured by both the demand, let's say the multiplier and this ratio between multipliers. It's actually that it is not good in, I mean, it's in relative terms, it performs worse for both either output, employment, CO2, and imports and import demand. So to wrap up a bit so we do well actually with this with the criteria that we impose to create the scenario. We actually find out that picking ex ante the sectors where to invest, where to pour these additional resources, does not deliver the best ex post result. In a way, because we do not take properly into account the input-output relationships. And we do also find out that there is a correlation, and for the US economy between import and ecological sustainability. One can argue what, in the end, what's the meaning of worrying about import sustainability for the US? Because I mean, the US is not. I mean, it doesn't face at all the external constraint. But I mean, it may be one can also make the case that it may be important to somehow tame or to contain import demand, because it has this property, because it's strongly correlated with carbon emission, and of course again. If we again find out that there is this let's say if we try to again tame or to contain, let's say to focus too much on CO2 and CO2 and import demand reduction, because we have a negative impact on the say import and employment and employment and output generation, and the other way around. If we do focus too much on output and employment generation, we do have a negative effect, unwanted negative effect on the side of CO2 and import demand. So.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Giuliano. I will now turn the floor to Etienne Espagne. This is the one. Sorry. Who will be talking about climate change exposure and macroeconomic vulnerabilities. We're switching chairs. Fine. I'll start sharing. Yes, so Etienne Espagne is a World Bank Senior Climate Economist at the Office for Equitable Growth, Finance and Institution in the Chief Economist Office. And Etienne, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Antoine. So I will present you on ongoing work with colleagues from IFD and non-IFD as well. So Guilherme is in the room, and Edouard Sampé from Economics, Michel Signoni from RAE, and Irène De Ecker from IRD. The goal of this work is to try to assess the exposure of all economies, basically, to climate impacts with a kind of new conceptual framework that started to be developed at IFD. In this particular case, the goal is to move a bit beyond the aggregate damage functions that we usually encounter in integrated assessment models. So the model DICE, Nordhaus is usually the example that's given to say, oh, this is really a horrible damage function, it's too optimistic, etc., etc. More recently, let's say in the last decades, lots of econometric work has been done to try to see how observed climate change has built sectoral damage functions. And we will actually use this work to try to assess at a more macroeconomic level the exposure of economies to different dimensions to climate impacts. So the first work is to really try to build country sector-specific damage functions for as many countries as possible. Understanding that the idea behind this is that, of course, the impact of climate change will be very different across industries, but also across countries. Then the goal is also to understand that if a sector is impacted, it's not just this sector that is impacted, but also all the propagation through industries within the country, but also with the rest of the world, with a lot of inter-industrial and cross-country impacts. So that's the cascading impacts that need to be assessed as well in the case of climate change. And finally, we don't really trust the substitutability hypothesis that is usually embedded in computable general equilibrium models, CG models, and that says that basically just the reaction of prices to an impact will absorb most of the shock. So instead of trying to investigate this better, so most CG models use estimates of substitution coefficients in developed economies where there are lots of data, and then just take those coefficients as well for developing an emerging economy, which is can be a big problem. So instead of going that far, we just look at the economic exposure to climate change, meaning that we don't make any hypothesis on how technology or structural change will react to that. So in the end, what we bring is this new country by sector damage database and the analysis of the propagation of these shocks through the use of multi-regional tools. How did we build this country sector damage database? We looked at different potential impacted sectors, very traditional ones: agriculture, fisheries, energy, tourism, which is more on the demand side, but also at more transversal types of impacts. So due to the impacts due to sea level rise or the impacts on labor productivity. So for example, for agriculture, we took the most recent and global existing studies and build an aggregate damage function out of the different recent studies that are actually quoted in the latest IPCC report. For fisheries, there are also a few global studies that we use, and we took them to build unique aggregate damage function by country for the fisheries. In the case of energy, the relation to climate change is not just on temperature, but also precipitation, wind speed, runoff, solar irradiation. So we use a very recent study as well that gives regional impacts of climate change on the different sources of energy supply. For tourism, the question is a bit different because tourism is really a demand effect. So what we look at tourism is the impact of temperature increase on the international tourism flows, and how then these changing flows will be distributed sectorally in the economy using tourism satellite accounts. So in this case, it's different recent studies that we had to put together to build this estimation of the change of tourism flows and their sectoral distribution for most of the countries. And then the transversal impact, so sea level rise and beyond sea level rise is also the storms, how do we say that, the flooding impacts due to the storms combined with sea level rise that we assess, and labor productivity, which we have just done very recently, but it's not included in the results in this presentation, that could have quite a strong impact. So this is the kind of database that's hopefully when we consider it complete enough, it will be also available openly to for others to use in other research questions. So now we use this database and couple it with a multi-regional output model. That means that taking a climate change scenario, we can assess the direct impact on these industries that I just mentioned, so agriculture, tourism, energy, etc. But also the indirect upstream impacts on the industries that are required for the directly impacted industries. The kind of schematic graph that explains how we consider the climate impacts and the indirect climate impacts in the economy. So the model is using a recent multi-regional input-output data, which is called LORIA, and using the hypothetic extraction method, meaning that we consider the current output based on this inverse Leontief equation, and we compare it to the output when we extract the impacted industries, or when we extract the part of the impacted industries that is considered destroyed by the climate impact. So that leads to the overall potential output losses, X minus stuff. But then, as we did in a previous paper as well, in the case of the exposure to a low carbon transition, we want to look at different dimensions of impacts. So not just, let's say, GDP impacts, but we consider that foreign exchange exposure is very important, but fiscal exposure as well, wage and employment exposure are important. So using the same MRAO tables, but expanded to other more detailed fiscal data or wage and employment data, we can extract both the direct and indirect impacts on these three of climate change on the three dimensions. Now, the results I will present you today. First, they don't incorporate all the damage that I described. So it's preliminary results. So that is an idea of where we are heading to. So in the case of the exposure to, in terms of net foreign currency revenues from the impacted industries, that's the y-axis, and on the x-axis you have the fiscal exposure. So you see something. First, you can see that the scale is logarithm, right? It's not a regular one. And you have, let's say, two groups of countries, but on the top right side, countries that are the most exposed. Okay, yeah, right. Good question. So the climate scenario considered here is a +2 degree scenario. So indeed, and I think there's lots of development to be done in terms of looking at different climate scenarios and the uncertainty around climate scenarios as well, which we don't look at here. So we kind of take a central point for 2 degree scenario. So basically two groups of countries, very different exposures in general in terms of fiscal and net foreign currency. We could pick which country should we pick. Vietnam, where is Vietnam? I can see. I see Myanmar, which is close to Vietnam. It is on the extreme right-hand side. You can see Myanmar here, for example. That should be Vanuatu, right? And most developed, most European countries are around here: Spain, Italy, France. So indeed, that's not very surprising. We have different types of exposure on those two dimensions. We can have the same approach, but country by country, and certainly between the types of sectors that are impacted. And what you can see here is that it's sea level rise that ultra dominates the impacts. And for taxes, at least for fiscal exposure, the indirect exposure is quite important as well, which is great. If you look at the more socioeconomic results, so employment versus wages, employment on the y-axis, wages on the x-axis as well. So not results to be trusted too much yet, but still we can have a strong. We can observe a strong dispersion as well. It's not a pure correlation with between employment and wages. So you see that there's many countries for which, for example, employment is more an issue than wages, and it's probably also countries where agriculture takes an important toll in terms of climate impacts. To look this same way at the disaggregation between different sectors, again, sea level rise dominates here as well. The indirect impacts in terms of wages and employment are also very important. Okay, discussion. First, we have a few drawbacks that we clearly admit at this stage. On the agricultural sector first, we could only find reliable data on the main crops, main types of cereals. Reliable data that cover sufficient number of countries and with a sufficiently robust estimation as well. That means that a good part of agriculture as well is not included in the damage function. We don't take into consideration for now short-term disasters, of course, that lead to severe impacts and severe also cascading impacts, because they are more short-term effects. Now, sea level rise, sectors with a highly vulnerable capital tend to be more impacted, but this is not considered here. So we have also a kind of narrow way to take into account sea level rise in the MRAO, in the sectoral impacts. And in terms of propagation, you may have looked at the graph before. We only look at the upstream indirect effects here, and not the potential downstream effects, which could be important. For example, if you have a shock on agriculture, the price will increase, and any product that incorporates this agricultural product would also face a price increase as well, which would lead to competitiveness effects and also different multidimensional effects as well that we have not considered yet. Finally, no, that's it. I think that's that's propagation. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Etienne. And so now we move to the last presentation by Guilherme Magacho on ecological transition in natural resource exporter country model, a structural SFC model. And I will share my screen. And you can see it. And Guilherme, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for. Okay.
No, it's not the right.
No, but it's right, but only the cultures are wrong.
I might have stolen your presentation for my presentation for tomorrow. We will skip it first.
Okay, it's a paper developing me and Daniel Spinola and Antoine Godin and the Green Ilmas. And thank you very much for CBS to present here. It's a paper in progress, but still have some, I think it's interesting when I'm presenting. Well, the idea of the paper is basically that we're talking about low carbon transition, we're talking about a structural change. We need to think about low carbon transition or climate impacts. We need to think as a structural thing. Like historically, we have many other kinds of structural change, changing paradigms, turning paradigm. But this one is another one that is very important, but they have like specific issues. For example, the fact that it's going to be very fast. We're talking about these, like the industries are changing. In the last 10 years, all the development that we're having, solar panels, for example, is impressive. And of course, like there are some policies that are leading to peace and technological change, but some industries will be more impacted than others. And because the sectors are structurally different, Etienne was talking, for example, about the climate change. Climate impacts will be completely different if we're thinking about tourism, if we're thinking about the case of tourism is going to be like a reduction in demand. In the case of agriculture, it's going to be like a reduction in yields, productivity. In the terms of construction, it's going to be like productivity, labor productivity will decrease. So we need to think about the structure of these climate effects as something structural, because sectors are different. And sectors are also different in many other aspects that we'll need to consider. If you're thinking, for example, market structure, and this is the focus of this paper, we're talking about natural resource exporter countries, and you're going to see how it's important for most of the developing countries, not all of them, but most of them. They are price takers. They cannot compete in a monopolistic way as the developed countries compete. So in these sectors, so the impact is going to be very different from this in this aspect. And we need to consider for this difference. We also need to consider that the sector, they have different productivity dynamics. And the productivity in these sectors as in different sectors are completely, in the case of tourism, for example, you have one dynamics. In the case of capital goods, or you have a very different way where productivity is incorporated into production. And I will try to get a little bit faster on this, but basically countries will be impacted differently. And we need to consider all the dimensions that, for example, the paper of Giuliano was talking about this, paper of Etienne was talking about this. We need to consider that employment will be something very important. In some cases, avoiding foreign currency constraints is going to be very important. Like we have to look at the impact on imports, for example. And some sectors are very important in terms of fiscal, especially when you're talking about developing countries that depends on these industries, natural resource industries, as a source of revenue, fiscal revenue. We need to consider this difference when we're analyzing economies. Here are a few examples of countries that are like to this, but they have many. Few examples of countries that are very dependent on natural resource exporters. Algeria, very dependent on fossil fuels. Argentina, very dependent on agriculture. Peru, mainly ores. Indonesia, agriculture and fossil fuels, but also a more diversified economy. If you look at Indonesia, you have like these two sectors. I don't know if these figures are common for you, but yeah. If you look at these, you have like agriculture here, you have coal, and you have some ores here, but you have manufacturing industries here. So it's a more diversified economy, but still very dependent. About 50% of the economy depends on the natural resources. And of course, like the impacts of damages, climate impacts will be very different from one country to another. And you cannot just have, as Etienne said, general. We cannot have like a general damage function that will explain all the damages for the countries in one way, because they are very different, structurally different, and you need to consider this difference. And the diversity of the countries will be also very important, because of Brazil, South Africa, Indonesia, we have to consider that they are exporting different types of natural resources. The thing about Brazil, they are ores, fossil fuels, and agriculture. So like 80% of the exports are natural resources, but very diversified within natural resources. It seems to be a good thing. Well, I took this graph here because I think it's very interesting, and because I think it's very clear to show why it's important to look at demand-led models. Usually, if you think about all the CGEs, all the DICE models, they consider that you're going to produce and you're going to save, and your savings will be invested. So there is no function for financial, there is no financial constraints, there is nothing to do with financial. Maybe you can have some financial CGEs, but they are like finance there is like very secondary. In demand models, there is the investment and there is the demand, like let's say that based on demand, entrepreneurs will decide how much they will invest, but also they will consider the credit that they have available. So finance plays a very important role when you're thinking about investment in expanding our capital or investment in innovation. So it's going to be something very important for the economists to look at, to all economists, of course, to look at credit constraints. We go a little bit further and we look at export and imports that they have completely different dynamics. In CGE models, one adjusts to the other because you have like price increase that will lead to, if exports drop, then imports will drop as well because the economy will adjust. There will be some price mechanisms that will adjust. But of course, the equilibrium model. If we're looking at countries, we have to look at the disequilibrium because at first these exports will decrease, and then imports, it has nothing to do with exports because exports is determined by competitiveness and imports is determined by demand. So they have completely different behaviors. They are not connected a priori. Of course, there will be some connection in the future. But what happens is that in the same for taxation, they have completely different, because of government spending and taxation, they have completely different dynamics. You cannot have only one closely connected to the other. But then what happens if we have a balance of payment crisis, for example, leaded by a drop in exports, or a fiscal crisis leaded by a drop in taxation because, for example, Etienne was talking about reduction of taxation, climate impacts that will reduce the production, agriculture production, and then taxation on this agriculture production. Well, they have credit impacts. They will constrain credit. Why? Because you have to increase interest rates, so you're attracting more capital to compensate for the drop in exports. You have to increase interest rates because you're emitting more bonds. So you need to. So it's like credit plays a very important role. And when we're talking about developing countries, these two mechanisms plays an even more important role because they are extremely the way they are related to the international financial market. Well, the model finally. I have so many. Okay. Well, the model, we take the prototype model of the James model and we divide it into three sectors: natural resources, non-tradable goods, and other manufacturing tradable and price tradable goods. They are strictly different. For example, the case of natural resource, they are price taker. The price is international, so they are commodities. So you cannot decide. I know maybe some countries have a market power enough to, I don't know about like Colombia in coffee production.
Brazil?
Yep, Brazil, for example, they have some.
Cote d'Ivoire? Did you take into consideration?
Yeah. It's not empirical work, it's more theoretical, but the idea is like, okay, we're talking about natural resource as a commodity that you are completely price taker. We're not considering, for example, coffee in Colombia, which is a little bit different, but most of the countries that we're seeing before are price takers, they are commodity exporters, and they cannot decide about the price, which is completely different from the manufacturing sector. Manufacturing sector, especially if we're talking about more advanced manufacturing industries, and the classification here is a little bit complex, but there are some studies that from the 80s to now, we have many studies that try to understand these dynamics. Manufacturing industries are more, they produce heterogeneous goods. They have some market power in international markets. So we have completely different market structure. You have different decision because of this market structure. For example, in the case of manufacturing, the expectation is mostly due to demand. So we're looking at the expected demand. In the case of natural resources, they are looking at the expected prices. How it's going to be the future prices of soybeans, and then I will decide how much I'm going to invest. So this is very important because it creates completely different dynamics in completely different sectors. And this is basically what the structuralist tradition says. Like, I'm not inventing anything. And the model has some institutional sectors, households, government, banks, central bank, and the rest of the world. Each one has its importance. I'm not going to leave now because I don't have time. This is the transaction flow matrix. I don't want you to see what's happening here. I just want to see to show you that here we have an input-output. Actually, it's a supply and a use table together. So we have the supply use table in the production side. We also have the social account matrix. We also have all the interest payments and all the dynamics of the dividends and the financial flows. So we need to account for all of these. It's a little bit complicated. Well, the first simulation we do, we consider the price of natural resources. So it's a very theoretical model. Let's say, and the idea of the model is like, okay, we have the prototype, and then we can start thinking about what's happening within industry and within countries, specific countries. But the first thing that you consider is that we have a fluctuation on prices. So the fluctuation on commodity prices, which is I consider here 10 years fluctuation. So it's like it starts here at 0 and finishes here at 1. But you also have some trend. This trend is very important. Previous talked a lot about the declining price of natural resources. And here we're considering a drop of 1% per year in the natural resources compared to the manufacturing goods. Manufacturing goods are growing at 2% per year, the price. There is inflation, world inflation of 2% per year, but the inflation of natural resources is 1% per year. Does it mean that there is a negative trend compared to the rest of the sectors in this industry? And it has some consequences. And what we do here is simulate some, we have these dynamics, we simulate what price, carbon price impacts in the economy, like carbon taxation impact. So in red, you have no carbon taxation. In blue, we have 25% of taxation sales volume of the natural resource industries, which is the one that emit CO2. We're considering this, but of course, you can put in other industries as well, according to the CO2 emission of these industries. Basically, what we see is that it's very good from the point of view of the government financial needs. The government doesn't, of course, it's like a source of tax, so it's like it's reducing the government financial needs, so it's like the public safety, basically. We have more possibility. The government doesn't need to finance, which means that it will reduce public debt, of course. You don't need to emit bonds to pay for your expenses because it's reducing your financial needs. You have this impact on bonds interest rate, and the normal impact, the impact in the base scenario is this red one. So you're reducing, of course, the bond interest rate, which is great for the perspective that we were talking about before. Like you're reducing the financial constraints, but the problem is you're reducing your financial constraints in cost of economic growth. If you look here, trade surplus, you're reducing the trade surplus, but you're imposing a carbon tax, so you're moving to other industries. This is the CG argument. We're like, okay, you're imposing some taxes in the industries that emit the most, so you're going to move to the other industries. Well, but you have a negative impact. You have a negative impact because you're has less incentives to invest. And you, of course, if you're not investing, you're not buying capital goods. If you're not buying capital goods, you're not importing. So most of the reduction in trade surplus is to reduction of imports. Sorry, in the long term, reduction in imports because we're not increase of trade surplus or reduction of trade deficit. And there is this, which is important actually. It seems small, but you are increasing the share of the other goods on your export basket, which is the most of the arguments in favor of this taxation is on this. But the consequence, of course, is negative. If you and I put here share of world GDP because we consider the world GDP is growing at the same rate, so it's not impacted. The economy is a small economy. So when you're looking at the share of GDP, we're saying that when you're imposing this carbon, you're reducing from year to year the growth rate, and only after about 15 years you will start reducing the negative impacts that you had in the very beginning. So it's very recessive from the point of view of because most of the arguments say that okay, you're moving to other industries, the substitutability that Etienne was talking about. Most of the arguments on CGE models or they are considering that there is a high substitutability. But if you're considering that the capital is there and is going to last for at least 20 years, if you're investing in a power plant, it's going to last at least for 20 years, the impact will be in the long term, not in the short term. So it's going to be like it's there producing for long term. So we're reducing. So all the capital that you invest before is not as productive as it's going to produce the same amount, but it's more costly and you don't have incentives to produce. And then the idea here is to show basically that carbon price is not as good as it seems for promoting structural change as most of the CGE models try to convince us that, okay, just put carbon price and it's going to be perfect because you have the right incentives for the economy to move to low carbon emitting industries. Yeah, but there will be like a very high 15 years of reduction growth rates, which is, even if you have like positive effects in GDP for the government, then there will be very important negatives for the government. The other thing that we did is like simulating a damage impact from 0 to 5%. The blue is 0, the red is 5%. And the first thing that we did is just very, as I said, it's like a paper that's under construction, is to look at the productivity of capital productivity of the sector of natural resources. So we're reducing the capacity of, for example, agriculture. The capital becomes less productive. You have to produce the same amount. You need to have more capital because the land is less productive. But you can have like different types. For example, you can see what happens with you have a drop on exports of tourism, for example, and then we have a different impact. So the idea is to look at these, and I will try to explain a little bit. Of course, the sector that's first impacted is production of the natural resources, so it's the sector that's impacted. But one thing that we did is to incorporate these damages in the expected profitability. In the very beginning, when we start here, they don't know what this damage is. The damage starts happening, but now they are starting incorporating the expected profitability these damages, and they start perceiving that okay, these damages are happening, and more I have to invest to produce the same amount. More and more I have to invest to produce exactly the same amount that it's not as before that I have. What happens with the economy? Basically, when they start incorporating these damages, there is this impact here, and you have these negative impacts happening in the economy. So basically, what we want to do with this paper, basically build this structural stock and flow consistent method. Why structural? Because it's not only multi-sector, it's not only an input-output stock and flow consistent model, because we're considering different behavior equations for the sectors. It's a prototype. It's like at this moment, we're not looking at specific industries, but we're trying to look at what happens if we're considering these industries as it is. The results, primary results, show that carbon price is very recessive because, especially for countries that doesn't have a high degree of substitutability, they cannot move easily from high carbon industries to low carbon industries, which is the case of most of the developing economies, unfortunately. Yeah, damages, they have like, especially they are negative, they become negative in the short and medium run, especially when they start being incorporating into the expected profitability of the industries. So when they realize, because there is this discussion on like, okay, you're going to have damages, you have to be rebuilt, and this is going to have like a positive impact on the economy in the end, because you have to invest more, there is more demand for capital goods, the economy will grow because you have to replace. But the problem is that when they incorporate in the profitability, the expected profitability, that these damages are happening and they are investing for nothing, then the profitability start dropping, and the investment, of course, which is led by profitability, will drop as well. And the next steps is like look at different climate shocks, because we're just this one where we can incorporate most of the things that Etienne said, and maybe one day calibrating for specific economies, or not stop talking about like theoretical things. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Guilherme. Okay, so now we have time. If we want to stick to the original planning, we will have 40 minutes, but we can also try to stick to the original ending time, which is 20 minutes. I think we can do that. So, is there any questions? Let's take a round of questions, and then we can ask the different presenters to respond. Yes.
I'm Ecological from Greece, from Center of Planning and Economic Research. All the presentation was very interesting. I have two questions. One for Etienne and the other for Giuliano. First of all, you talk about the hypothetical extraction method. Am I right? That is based on Strasser 68.
Yeah. Sorry. It is based on. Yeah, no, but it was.
Because based on Strasser 68.
No, it's like actually it's based on the there was a bit there
but don't the criticism of Bagger in 113 and 1997.
Yeah, that's what we are looking at. We took the method that Blair developed in 2015, which is a little bit different.
Yeah, but I ask for, because there are some differences that can change the output decision.
We're looking at only because it's not a complete distraction, it's a partial distraction. So
okay, they don't take into account the backward and forward linkages, this method.
It's only backward.
And that's a technical condition of production, not the social. Okay. And I was so impressed with your presentation. I'm enthusiastic. You enter a supply and use table into a stock flow model. This is a huge contribution. This is a huge contribution if this works. This is my second question.
Yes. No, but it's like
it works.
It works.
Okay.
It works doesn't mean it fits. Because like sorry.
Have you made some simulations with the dimensions and all these things?
Yeah, I mean, let me just jump in. You can come to the presentation by Développement tomorrow on Tunisia. You will see an empirical input-output.
But I'm also surprised with supply and use.
Yes,
supply and use. Because most of the time talk about the output. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You should listen to the presentation tomorrow. Other questions, Etienne?
Yeah, on the latest paper, I wonder a bit what the research question was. So, I see the model and the work, but then what is the main topic that you want to raise? More on damage, more on price, more industrial policies as a complement to carbon price. I just wondered how you model the carbon price specifically. And you mentioned very different countries as an example at the beginning. And I think some of them would benefit from exporting critical minerals, maybe Peru will benefit a lot, and others will just have the extraction sector collapsing. So the effect of the carbon price is not necessarily so determinant. It's really the global transition that will determine how the extraction sector will behave, right?
Yeah, in the case, yeah. But,
Yeah. Do you have the question is clear? You can answer that. Any other
question?
Take one question. Yeah. Any other? Yeah, Eric.
Quick, is it Giuliano?
Yeah, Giuliano.
Oh, Giuliano. Yeah. So, in the U.S., there are some questions about the inflationary impact of stimulus just at the moment. And so I would wonder, since you're looking at these using the input-output structure, if you are trying to support employment in a sector that is seeing either periodic or secular decline, could that put pressure on sectors that are not yet seeing that? So, for example, if you are intervening in say some small industries, and it stimulates investment, but actually construction is already tight, can you identify some of those potential problems where stimulus in one sector actually exacerbates tightness elsewhere?
Let me just one last question. Yes.
I wonder, you use the input-output model. How does it come that you have a change in wages? You have to change.
So it's
Okay. It's difficult, yeah, to connect. I can see that everyone wants to respond quickly. So we have three questions. I get one for you, one for you, one for you. Then you start. And you start.
Yeah, because you respond about the supply and demand, but I think one thing that's important when you do this is to differentiate the input-output coefficient and the supply efficiency, because and in my point of view, I think the supply and tables they make more sense when you're looking at transitional metrics, because you're looking at both. You're looking at what the sectors are, because you're talking about sectors that are buying and sectors that are producing, and the sectors that are, so it's like you have the production of the sector for the sector itself, which is the supply table, and the use of the sector of the other sectors, which is in this table. So it fits theoretically. The thing is, that's the problem. The thing is, when you fit with data, it doesn't fit. Because, of course, the data is made up from bottom to top. So when you're thinking about how national accounts are built, they are built from the consumption, government spending, they are built from the demand side, the supply side. So what do you have to do? It's basically take the technical coefficients, what I did at least, take the technical coefficients, take everything, and then rebuild the theoretical supply use table, because then the supply path, to based on the technical coefficients. I don't know if it's
Can you repeat that? Can you repeat that? Do what?
To reconstruct the use table based on the technical conditions.
So to create, because the issue with I'm sorry that speaking, the issue with the supply use tables is that somehow it's a reflection of the reality. This means that it's a reflection of joint production. To go to Jay wants to go to the fundamentals.
Yeah.
So this is, I think, the biggest difficulty. So somehow you make it like an input output that any sectors produce just one product. No.
Yeah, but they are the same sectors. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, but then you can use the market share built based on the supply table to redistribute. So it's possible to do the redistribution. Okay, it's not me that are producing, but the other guy, the other sector is producing the good and so that's why it's important. And I think
I'm sure this is the will ask you later on.
But this is a certain discussion because like it's very difficult to fit this data because they don't.
This is
But tomorrow the free. Explain what he did for to me. It's like, and okay, about your questions. Sorry for talking too much, but the focus of the paper is not about damages, it's about how you have to think structurally when you're talking about low carbon transition. This is the focus of the paper. Of course, like if we're talking about carbon price, we're looking at, okay, if you're not thinking structurally, it seems to be something that's very effective because it's not structural, so the economy can easily move from one industry to another. If you're thinking structurally, you can clearly have the industries that are like constraining these movements from moving from industry to another. And then we need to think structurally. If we're thinking about damages, we're thinking about different types of damages. So we need to think structurally. Which is definitely not about theory. Of course, it can be used to argue for that, but it's about like we need to think structurally. Otherwise, we're just talking what we have, the discussion that we had the first presentation today, the very first one, which is like, okay, you have like loss of 10% in world GDP, which is nothing because the world GDP has grown, right? So the same numbers. So there's nothing to do. But the distribution facts, this is going to be very, very, very important. Yeah. Just finished the discussion about how we incorporate carbon price. I just put a price on the production of these sectors. So it's like the natural resource sector, because I'm assuming this is the sector that is the only sector that emit. But of course, like I can look at the CO2 emission by sector and have a carbon price in these industries, which is given, or you can have some endogenous carbon price as well. If you have a carbon market, you can stand a little bit more because you have to create a new market, the carbon market. And about like the sectors that, for example, we talked about Peru, which is exporting some minerals that are important for the transition. This is very interesting because then we can incorporate, okay, there will be demand for this. It's going to be demand, there will be investment. This investment is going to be in Peru. This investment is going to be in the cities in Peru has a great possibility of having. And you can play with like the markup of, because firms can also, in the model, firms can access international markets directly or indirectly, like FDI or through financial market, through lending markets, borrowing. And you can play with the markup. Say, okay, for this sector, the markup is very low because there is a lot of incentives, so you can play with these. But I didn't do it yet. I didn't do it.
I guess you would expect in front of the carbon price story the usual industrial policy, targeted investment policy story. See, you have different effects in growth.
Yeah. And while you're doing this, I'm taking one of the questions that we had in the chat, which is if you were to reinvest your carbon taxes onto specific investment, then you could counter the recessive effect.
Yeah, it's just like hedging.
You don't recycle the carbon price anywhere. Recycle it.
No. What I do is like this. As you said in the first three graphs, they are reducing government financial needs, and then they reduce the public debt, and it reduces bonds risk and attract investment. But it's like only the classical story that the market solve the issue. You're solving the financial problem of the government. But of course, you can do a direct investment policy in the other industries.
On the scenario question, so we compare two situations. One which is basically the current situation of the MRI data, and one theoretical situation where we would have extracted from the data the impacted part of the sectors, right? So we look at the wages and employment that are exposed to that. So it's not really that the wages are going to move. It's just that we compare two situations.
Unless Nico wants to say something about the question. No, because I mean part of this methodology, one of the assumptions that I left out of from the presentation was that actually in the estimation for the multiplier, we assume that made the assumption of stationary prices. So if we drop the assumption, perhaps we can say something about this.
Just that, if I'm not wrong, the inflation in the US is an imported inflation, or I'm wrong.
It's a mix.
It's a mix.
There are many
Yes,
factors.
it started, but starts from imports and then.
There's actually a bit on. It's a mix. You can take any source you like.
Yeah.
So that wouldn't work.
That was an easy answer that I had.
Okay.
I'm going to make the important bit.
That's wonderful.
Because we have a mix about import dependency, so we can say that.
Okay.
But then we have to make it dynamic because it's a static model.
Okay.
So we can somehow dynamicize the price because it has also quantity side and the price side in this model. So we have to dynamize this model. So this is the reason that we cannot speak about how the price would change. But at the same time, if it's imported, we have an answer.
You can say. Okay, good. Thank you.
I have two questions. I don't know if anyone wants to ask a question. One last question.
Just short. No, I think that it's important what. I just have a quick question for Guilherme. And it's, when you talk about ecological transition, at the same time, you need to think in these kind of countries and in the export transition, you have like the challenge for the transition at the same time. So I think that this is an important point, but basically is the one that I have every day, to academia, to the government. But but there appears like, something that was, we're talking about carbon prices, but maybe you have things like a new treatment in the model of the relationship with the debt, because I think that part of this issue is how we rethink the relationship with the debt or a new debt management framework. As you are doing the representation of damage function, I don't know if we can try to have different, or even in that framework, it will work. It's just something that I was thinking, but basically it's good work.
Thanks. I will ask my two questions, and actually 2.5 to 3 actually, because that is a question from the audience, the live audience, about is there any green products that we could try to consider into trying to tame, and it connects to what Diego was saying, trying to tame the negative effects of the transition, or at least mitigate. But that's something we can. Yeah, so that's one. Green finance. I have one question for sorry, your first name? Giuliano. So it's a wrong question. So if I understand correctly, your ELR is a demand effect. So it assumes an increase in production or demand. But technically, if you think about an ELR, it would be something that would be very different. I don't. All of what you presented was extremely interesting. It's just that the framing of within ELR is somewhat surprising. And then also, if you think about the transformative change that would be required, and this is something we try to connect with the public employment schemes in developing economies, where the idea is that the public employment schemes would lead to a transformative change of the economy, either in terms of increasing adaptation measures or in terms of developing global supply value chains, in terms of the low carbon transition, so on and so forth. So I was wondering if that's something you could consider afterwards. And one question for Etienne. This morning, Antoine was criticizing heavily damage function. In a way, you're responding partly to this critique because you're not addressing like damage function as an aggregate damage function. You're trying to go down to the sectoral damage. However, what he was saying is that you have to distinguish between climate impacts and then the economic consequences of it. And here you don't go into the economic impacts. You just look at the emergent economic consequences of temperature change and precipitation change without going into the biophysical or process-based damages. And so implicitly you're assuming that whatever happened in the past will be responding the same way if you were to have like a +2 degree or something like that. So there is no question about, and we've seen this with the crisis, right? So sometimes the shock is so large that the inflation risk comes and is incredibly large. So yeah, I'm readdressing the critique of the man, maybe seeing if you have any response to that. And yeah, I think we can. If there's no more question, we can go to the response.
May I follow up quickly on that one? Just to add, as a concrete example, I was thinking about, there's a physical assessment of potential yield, impact on potential yield rather than realized yield, the Global Agroecological Zones Project. And so you could see how the potential yield goes down, but also what crops might become suitable in a place where the current crops are becoming less suitable.
To answer your second question, yes, I mean, we can definitely, try to develop this and take this work and further taking consideration all that you said. And as for the first question, yeah, I mean, it's basically a way to tackle some of the to improve in some way the work made by Kanye on risk. So I mean, she employed this this simple input-output framework to assess some, not just for risk, but also the follow-up, and they made this model for the US. But of course, I mean, there is some problem with the, let's say, standard, the other inverse, that in a way they don't take into account all the 4 dimensions that I mentioned during my presentation. So yeah, it's a way to, of course, follow up. But I do agree with you that perhaps to have more, say, for a more correct framing of this program, we will have to create to set up a dynamical model, and then a fully coherent perhaps the flow model, which does incorporate also this multi-sectoral framework with using the input output data. So yeah, this is something that we can definitely look for an extension of this points.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
However, this model can be include also the imports to be the export of another country. So it can be somehow a closed model. You can name a big economy in the whole world and your country, but you can take also some other countries. So this issue somehow you can manage it. This is a new project that we will work, which is such a issue. So I think that is an answer of this question.
Thank you. Tim.
Yeah. So I think we don't pretend to solve definitively the problem with damage function. However, what we do, so we have the biophysical impacts, because that's basically the kind of scenarios we're taking as an input. We can show already a map with biophysical impacts by country. Then the only thing we do is take recent references, analysis of sectors, country data. When there are several of those analyses for one sector, we do some econometric work to assess one unit damage function out of those. Then we have the damage function at country sector level. Of course, it's based on past observations, or sometimes it's based also on specific modeling. In that sense, it's not necessarily econometric work. And then there is the cascading effect, implication effect that can be reworked. So I'm not sure it answers I know the position of Antoine, and I share it in general. The usual let's say, minimal position that we had was to say, okay, damage function at the aggregate level is crazy. It's more relevant to look at the local level. And even here, we probably miss many things, but that's the angle which we take. And then we also, through the cascading effects, we kind of also have further impact. I think that it's a kind of a way to bridge the problem from local to global by trying to have this huge database, this huge data work. I didn't show it well, I think, but behind that, it's a lot of data extraction, manipulation, and to rebuild this sectoral country database. And hopefully we come up with something that's more meaningful than non-house, but we're not completely there yet. So we're on the way.
Thank you. Well, it's a very hard question because they try to answer then tell a little bit about the story of the model, which is basically was hired by Ph.D. to develop the Brazilian model. Where in the Brazilian model, we have biofuel, it's a green industry. We have like a lot of different sectors. Electricity would have like completely different behavior. But in the case of Brazil, it's a sector that basically governs even space. Sometimes some parts are privatized, but the government, the way that it works is very lightly government industry. And we developed like this Brazilian model, which is not finished yet, but with different structure, thinking about the real close as possible to what happens with these industries, and close as possible to what happens with the government, political industry, industrial policies that they can play, and you have like green industries, brown industries. And the idea was like, okay, now that we have this, we're going to we now have a structural model for a specific country. We had some issues with to continue this model, but I tried to take the points that I thought it was more interesting in the model, which is like the different structural economy, to review the theoretical one with structural groups, but the idea of the model is like, okay, it's open enough to have like different industries. Maybe you can have a natural resource which is green. Maybe you can have two different manufacturing units producing solar voltaic and panels. So it's and we can also have like some possibilities of the government using. It's just like one application. The government using these carbon price to reinvest in specific industries, or using the debt to, or some shocks in debt, for example, like you have a decline in the ratio and what's happening in the economy. So that's the interesting thing we're playing. You should think about one sector model. It's very limited in this sense. The idea, which is like, of course, there are other advantages. For example, you don't need to feed food table. It's a huge advantage, but that's it.
Okay, I think we'll stop here. Thank you everyone for being in the presentation. Let's see each other tomorrow.